In the winter of 1862, a trapper named Elias Cobb walked out of the Montana wilderness after 11 days alone. No matches, no blankets, no food he brought with him. The temperature had dropped to 27 below zero on day 4. He came back with frostbite on 2 fingers and a deer carcass over his shoulder. His neighbors asked how he survived. He said his grandfather taught him. That grandfather had never once in his life paid a heating bill, a grocery bill, or a doctor's bill for anything a plant or a stone could not fix. What Elias knew, we were never supposed to forget, and yet here we are, paying $380 a month to stay warm in houses that would have embarrassed a man who built his own with an axe and a level. Tonight I am going to give you 20 of those forgotten tricks, straight from frontier journals, old homestead records, and families who never stopped using them. Some of these were quietly written out of government extension manuals after 1930. Some are still practiced today on remote properties in Montana, Vermont, and the Appalachian foothills. All of them work, all of them cost almost nothing, and every single one of them is something a modern regulatory body would rather you never learned. I have spent the last 4 years going through frontier diaries, territorial homestead records, and sitting in the kitchens of families who have lived off-grid, not as a lifestyle choice, but as a generational habit. I am talking about families in rural Kentucky, northern Vermont, and the high desert of New Mexico, whose great-grandparents built systems so effective that their grandchildren still use them today without modification. What I am about to share is not theory. It is not a survival influencer checklist. It is documented, practiced, field-tested knowledge that was systematically replaced by industries that needed you to buy something. The 20th trick, I am saving for the end. I found it in a handwritten homestead journal from 1891. It uses one ingredient most of you already have in your kitchen, and it does something no modern product on the market can replicate at any price. Stay with me. The frontier settlers of the Ohio Valley did not insulate their walls with anything you can buy at a hardware store. They packed dried bracken fern, wood shavings, and compressed leaf matter into a double wall cavity between 2 stacked log skins. The outer log faced the weather. The inner log faced the room. The cavity in between was filled tight with organic debris every October and removed every May so the wall could breathe through summer. A 1974 thermal resistance study published by a Vermont agricultural university found that a properly packed debris wall cavity performed within 8% of modern R19 fiberglass batting. The difference is that fiberglass costs money, compresses over time, and traps moisture. Dried bracken fern costs nothing, compresses further with age, and wicks moisture away from the wall surface. The settlers were not primitive. They were solving the same problem with zero budget and a wheelbarrow. Try packing an exterior wall cavity with compressed dry leaves in most American counties today, and your building inspector will cite you before spring. Every original frontier fireplace built before 1880 had a hand-carved wooden damper fitted at throat level, not at the flue top, the way modern dampers sit. The throat damper sealed the firebox from the chimney column when the fire was banked for the night. That single piece of carved hardwood stopped the chimney from acting as a vacuum, pulling warm room air up and out through the night. Modern building codes in most states require a specific metal damper design that sits at the top of the flue. The throat position is no longer approved for new construction. Yet frontier homes using the original throat damper design lost an average of 40% less overnight heat than homes using the approved modern equivalent, according to a 1988 passive heating comparison study from a Colorado research institute. The settlers were not losing heat all night. You are. This one I want you to pay close attention to, because the wrong version of this trick is dangerous and the right version is something you could set up this weekend. Frontier families in the Appalachian region used what they called a hearthstone battery, a specific arrangement of dense, dry field stones stacked on 3 sides of the firebox interior, not inside the fire itself. The stones absorbed radiant heat from the fire all evening and released it slowly into the room for 6 to 8 hours after the fire was fully out. The critical detail the frontier manuals are specific about is stone selection. Dense dry granite or solid quartzite only. Never river-tumbled stone. Never anything pulled from standing water. Waterlogged stone expands when heated and can fracture with enough force to cause serious injury. The frontier families knew this. The warning appears in at least 3 separate homestead journals I have read from that period. One properly arranged hearthstone battery of 12 to 15 stones, each the size of a standard brick, will hold enough thermal mass to keep a 400 square foot room above 58 degrees for 7 hours after the fire goes cold. A family in rural eastern Tennessee I spoke with last year still uses this method every winter. Their heating bill for January last year was $31. Before refrigeration, frontier families in the southern Appalachians and the mid-Atlantic backcountry kept perishable food cold through summer using a cooling stack, a shaded stone enclosure built into the north-facing base of a hill with a small vent at the top, and a sealed wooden door on the south-facing side. The cooling stack used the stable ground temperature at 3 feet of depth, which stays between 50 and 56 degrees year-round across most of the eastern United States, combined with passive convection airflow through the vent to maintain an interior temperature that reliably kept butter, soft cheese, and cooked meat for up to 9 days without any mechanical cooling. A man in western North Carolina showed me his family's version last summer, built by his great-grandfather in 1903, still in use. The butter inside was firm and sweet on a day when the outdoor temperature was 91 degrees. Frontier families preserved pork, venison, and beef through winter using a dry salt cure in a sealed hardwood box, packed in layers with coarse non-iodized salt, dried juniper berries, and cracked black pepper. No nitrates, no sodium erythorbate, no refrigeration at any stage of the process. A family in northern Vermont whose ancestors homesteaded the same land in 1816 still cures their own pork this way every November. The matriarch of that family, a woman in her late 60s, told me her family had never once had a case of food poisoning from home-cured meat. She said the secret is patience. The modern industry's secret is speed, and speed requires chemistry. The USDA currently classifies dry-cured meat produced without approved preservatives as commercially non-compliant. You can cure your own meat for your own household legally in every state. The moment you hand a slice to a neighbor, you are in violation. The early German settlers who homesteaded the hill country of central Texas in the 1840s brought with them a water filtration method developed in the Rhine Valley. A stacked ceramic vessel system using 3 chambers. Top chamber packed with crushed hardwood charcoal. Middle chamber packed with clean coarse sand. Bottom chamber with fine gravel and a linen barrier over the spigot. Water poured into the top, emerged from the bottom spigot in roughly 4 hours. Clear, odorless, and safe to drink directly from untreated creek or rain collection sources. An EPA comparative study from 1976, which was not widely circulated after publication, found that a correctly built, multi-stage slow sand and charcoal filter removed between 97 and 99.6% of common bacterial contaminants, including harmful strains of E. coli. Modern countertop filtration units, costing between $200 and $600, perform within the same range. The Frontier version costs about $18 in materials, and lasts indefinitely with basic maintenance. Every original Frontier cabin in the upper Midwest and New England had 2 doors at the main entrance, not one. The outer door was a heavy plank construction with a leather hinge. The inner door was lighter, fitted with a rope latch. The space between them, roughly 18 to 24 inches, acted as a thermal airlock. When you opened the outer door in January, you stepped into a dead airspace. You closed the outer door. Then you opened the inner door into the warm cabin. At no point did the outside air make direct contact with the interior. Modern construction builds one insulated entry door and calls it sufficient. The Frontier double-door system eliminated the single largest source of heat loss in a working cabin, which is not wall transmission or window leakage. It is door cycling. A family opens and closes a door 40 to 60 times a day. Each opening without an airlock costs between 8 and 12 minutes of accumulated heat. Frontier homesteaders in the Great Plains did not build wind barriers out of fencing or structural walls. They planted them. Specifically, a staggered 3-row planting of fast-growing native species, typically Osage orange, eastern red cedar, and black walnut, positioned 60 to 80 feet from the north and northwest faces of the cabin. A mature living windbreak of this design reduces wind-driven heat loss on the exposed wall face by between 30 and 50%, according to USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service data from 2004. The same data indicates that homes with established windbreaks on the northwest exposure use an average of 25% less winter heating fuel than comparable homes on open land. The Frontier families planted these the year they arrived. They were thinking in decades, not quarterly billing cycles. Frontier households produce their own light from rendered beef or mutton tallow, poured into shallow iron molds with braided cotton wicking. A single tallow candle burns for approximately 5 hours. A family rendering tallow from one beef animal produced enough raw fat for 200 to 300 candles. That is roughly 1,200 hours of light from one animal's byproduct. The candles are dipped, or molded in batches, in late October, hardened in the cold, and stored in a tin, or a root cellar, where the fat stays solid through the winter. A man in rural Idaho, I corresponded with last year, produces all of his household lighting this way. He buys no electricity for lighting purposes. His annual tallow candle production takes one full weekend in October. The Haudenosaunee agricultural system, adopted by frontier settlers across the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic by the early 1700s, used a companion planting method called the Three Sisters. Corn, beans, and squash planted together in a specific mounded arrangement that created a self-sustaining micro-ecosystem, requiring no fertilizer, minimal water management, and producing a caloric yield sufficient to sustain a family of 4 through winter storage. The corn stalks support the bean vines. The bean vines fix nitrogen into the soil for the corn. The squash leaves shade the ground, locking in moisture and suppressing weeds. The system is self-maintaining. Once established, the frontier families who used it consistently produced more storable calories per acre than any single crop system their European neighbors attempted. We are halfway through, and I want to stop here for a second, because I know some of you are watching this in a house that already has modern insulation, modern appliances, and a utility bill that keeps climbing anyway. And you are wondering if any of this actually applies to you. It does. Every single trick from here forward was specifically used by frontier families who were retrofitting existing structures, not building from scratch. Stay with me. Frontier families who inherited poorly constructed cabins or who moved into existing structures solved the drafty wall problem without tearing anything open. They hung heavy wool blanket panels on a rope system attached to ceiling joists, creating an interior curtain wall set 6 to 8 inches in from the exterior wall surface. The air gap between the curtain and the exterior wall became a dead air insulating layer, combined with a wool panel that itself had a natural R value of approximately R3 per inch of thickness. The curtain wall system added meaningful insulation performance to any poorly sealed exterior surface, with zero structural modification. This works in a house you rent, in an apartment, in a mobile home, in any structure where you cannot touch the walls. The frontier families figured this out because they had to. You can use it tonight. Before modern roofing compounds existed, frontier builders in the Pacific Northwest and upper New England used birch bark as a waterproofing layer under wood shingles. Birch bark contains a natural compound called betulin that repels water, resists mold, and remains flexible through freeze-thaw cycles without cracking. Homesteaders in northern Maine documented using birch bark underlayment on structures built in the 1840s that showed no water infiltration through the roof surface for over 30 years before any maintenance was required. Modern synthetic roofing underlayment carries a 25-year manufacturer warranty. The birch bark outlasted it. Frontier families across the upper Midwest preserved the bulk of their vegetable harvest through lacto-fermentation in stoneware crocks packed with salt brine. Cabbage, turnips, carrots, beets, and green beans were shredded, or sliced, packed into crocks with a precise salt ratio, and stored in the root cellar from October through April. The lacto-fermentation process creates lactic acid, which prevents spoilage without heat, without vinegar, and without any form of refrigeration. A properly fermented vegetable crock sealed with a waterlock lid stores safely for 6 to 9 months at root cellar temperatures. The nutritional content of fermented vegetables is measurably higher than the same vegetables preserved through heat canning, because the beneficial bacterial cultures survive and continue producing bioavailable vitamins through the storage period. For outdoor lighting and emergency illumination, frontier families in the Pacific Northwest and Appalachian region used pine pitch torches, a green hardwood handle split at one end, packed with dry pine hardwood chips soaked in rendered pine pitch, and tied with green bark cord. A single pine pitch torch burns steadily for 20 to 35 minutes and produces enough light to work by in complete darkness. A family could produce 50 torches from the pitch of a single mature pine in an afternoon. They cost nothing. They require no refined petroleum, and they produce a flame hot enough to start a fire in wet conditions, where a modern match or lighter would fail. Frontier builders in the Mid-Atlantic and New England used a specific lime wash applied to the interior surface of stone foundation walls every 3 to 4 years. The formula was hydrated lime dissolved in water to a thin slurry consistency, applied in 3 coats with a wide brush, each coat allowed to cure for 24 hours before the next application. The lime wash penetrates the surface of the stone and mortar and reacts with the calcium silicate in both materials to form a crystalline seal that actively blocks capillary moisture movement through the wall. It does not peel. It does not trap moisture behind a film surface the way modern latex paint does. It bonds to the substrate at a molecular level and becomes part of the stone surface itself. A properly lime-washed stone foundation wall shows no efflorescence, no mold growth, and no moisture staining for between 8 and 12 years per application. The cost per square foot is approximately 4 cents. The cheapest waterproofing paint product on the modern market runs 55 cents per square foot and requires reapplication every 4 to 6 years. Frontier families in the Midwest discovered early that dried corn cobs, the part of the corn plant that modern agriculture treats as waste, burn at a higher temperature than softwood and at a comparable temperature to hardwood, but ignite far more easily and produce a clean flame with minimal creosote buildup in the chimney. A family shelling corn for winter storage in the 1870s produced enough corncob fuel as a byproduct to supply a significant portion of their spring and fall heating needs. They burned nothing to produce it. It was a waste product of a process they were already doing. If you have access to any source of dried corn cobs today, whether from a farm supply store, a neighbor with a garden, or your own property, they are a completely free supplemental fuel source for any wood-burning appliance. The frontier families wasted nothing. Frontier families in every region of North America used to plants that grow wild in virtually every disturbed soil environment. On the continent, as their primary wound treatment for minor cuts, abrasions, and insect reactions. Yarrow, pressed and applied directly to a clean wound, is a documented natural styptic that significantly reduces bleeding time. Plantain leaf, the broad flat weed that grows in every lawn and driveway crack in America, contains compounds that reduce inflammation and draw out infection from shallow wounds when applied as a fresh poultice. Neither plant requires any preparation. Neither costs anything. Both grow within walking distance of virtually every property in the continental United States. The Frontier family's medicine cabinet was often nothing more than a walk through the yard. Frontier cabins with a sleeping loft, built 7 to 8 feet above the main floor, took advantage of a basic principle of thermal physics that modern single-story open-plan home design completely ignores. Heat rises. A sleeping loft positioned above the main living and cooking area accumulates the warmest air in the cabin naturally, without any mechanical assistance. Frontier families slept in the loft through winter. The main floor might drop to 48 degrees overnight. The loft, fed by rising warm air from the banked fire below, stayed consistently 12 to 18 degrees warmer than the floor level. They were not heating the whole structure. They were letting physics do the work. Modern homes are designed with bedrooms on the same level as living spaces, or below them in basement configurations. The pioneers would have considered both arrangements a waste of the most basic thermal resource available. Rising heat is free. Letting it escape through the ceiling costs you money every night. Frontier families across Virginia, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas built small stone structures directly over or adjacent to a cold spring, using the constant ground temperature water as a natural refrigeration medium for dairy products, eggs, and cooked foods. The spring house maintained an interior temperature between 45 and 52 degrees, year-round in most of the eastern United States. Milk kept in covered stone crocks, set in the flowing cold water, stayed fresh for 8 to 10 days. Butter kept for 3 weeks. Hard cheese kept for months. The spring house required no energy input of any kind. It needed no maintenance beyond an annual cleaning of the stone floor and channel. It produced cold storage as a simple function of geology, and it did it every day for the entire working life of the farm. A family in the Shenandoah Valley I visited 2 years ago still has a functioning spring house on their property. Built by their ancestors in 1878. They use it every summer. It is the most reliable cold storage they own. I found this in a handwritten homestead journal from 1891, recorded by a frontier builder named Samuel Hartwell, in a collection of territorial records held at a state archive in the Northern Rockies. Hartwell describes a wood preservation method his father learned from Scandinavian settlers who homesteaded the upper Midwest in the 1850s. It is called pine tar treatment, and it is the reason the original timber frame structures those settlers built are still standing today, while modern pressure-treated lumber begins degrading within 15 to 20 years. Here's what Hartwell recorded. You take Stockholm pine tar, the traditional cold process variety. You warm it gently until it thins to a brushable consistency. You thin it further with a small amount of raw linseed oil, in a ratio of roughly 3 parts tar to 1 part oil, and you brush it onto bare wood in a single generous coat, working it into the grain with a natural bristle brush. The pine tar penetrates 2 to 3 millimeters into the wood fiber. It does not film over the surface the way paint does. It becomes part of the wood. It repels water. It inhibits fungal growth. It prevents the UV degradation that grays and checks exposed timber. And it does all of this for between 10 and 20 years per application before it needs to be relocked. A gallon of Stockholm pine tar costs approximately $18. A gallon of raw linseed oil costs approximately $14. That mixture covers roughly 300 to 400 square feet of raw timber surface in a single coat. Hartwell wrote that his father treated the structural sill logs of their homestead in 1863. When Hartwell himself inspected those same logs in 1891, 28 years later, he found no rot, no fungal degradation, and no insect damage in the treated sections. The untreated sections on the same structure had required replacement twice in that same period. This is what was taken from us. Not by catastrophe, not by war, by commerce. Pine tar does not require a manufacturing plant, a distribution network, a retail shelf, or a recurring purchase. You buy it once, you apply it once every decade or two, and the wood beneath it outlasts the building code that approved the structure. Modern wood preservatives are a $4 billion industry in North America. Pine tar would eliminate the need for most of it. Hartwell ended that journal entry with a single line. He wrote, "The timber that drinks pine tar does not ask for mercy from the weather. It simply outlasts it." That is the knowledge the frontier families carried. That is what we stopped teaching. Now I want to hear from you. Of all 20 tricks I just walked you through, which one are you starting with this weekend? Is it the Hearthstone battery on the fireplace you already have? Is it the lime wash on a basement wall that has been damp for years? Is it the pine tar treatment on the fence posts, or the deck boards that are already starting to gray and split? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you already have a piece of land with any kind of spring, creek, or natural water source on it, leave a comment and tell me what you are working with. I will tell you which of these 20 tricks I would start with if it were my property. If what you heard tonight matched something you already suspected that real, proven knowledge has been quietly sidelined so someone else could sell you a product, then you already know what to do next. You find the old way. You test it. You keep what works. Subscribe to this channel. Not for me, for yourself, because the next video goes even deeper. I found a second journal in that same Northern Rockies archive collection, written by Hartwell's son in 1909. It describes a method the Scandinavian settlers used to keep a timber home cool through summer, without any mechanical ventilation whatsoever. The technique relies on something every property owner already has available to them, and it works so effectively that one family documented in that journal had not opened a window for cooling purposes in over 40 years. I will show you exactly how it works in the next video. The pioneers did not survive the frontier because they were harder than us. They survived because they paid attention to what actually worked, and they passed it down. Tonight, some of that passed to you. Now go, put it to work.